Hello, hello. Welcome to the PG-ish podcast. I'm Erin with your parental guidance to help you grow yourself as a parent and raise healthy, happy, and successful humans. I'm excited to introduce my guest, who is an entrepreneur, best-selling author, and mama. Kate Northrup has built a multimedia digital platform called The Origin Company that reaches hundreds of thousands globally. She's committed to supporting ambitious women to light up the world without burning themselves out. Amen to that, right? Kate teaches data and soul-driven time and energy management practices that result in saving time, making more money, and experiencing less stress. She's also the author of Money, a Love Story, and Do Less. And I referenced this in our conversation, but I read her book, Do Less, while I was traveling in Spain in 2019. Yes, I was in Spain drinking wine with my bestie and certainly didn't want to return to my intense work and commute-driven life in the US. But I also had realized that through this book, I felt seen and acknowledged that there was a different way to be a woman, mother, and working mama at that. With this new sense of identity and calling, I really didn't want to return because I didn't know where I was going to start. And I was too afraid I was going to fall back into a soul-sucking routine I called life. Granted, that did happen a little bit, but then COVID happened, and a lot changed after that, as you're fully aware. Yet the call for me since then has been to utilize the tools Kate has outlined in this book and doing additional research and work so that I can be another voice shouting that there's another way to live and thrive, especially as a woman. I hope you can lean in and learn from this conversation and feel it also, because there is a way to actually do less so that you can be so much more. Let me introduce you to Kate. Kate, I'm just so excited to have you on PG-ish today. I love this book, Do Less. I read it in 2019 when I was in Spain. I was vacationing in Spain with my best friend, drinking wine, no kids. And I'm like, yes, this is everything that's in my brain. And it's articulated in this way that I feel like everyone needs to read and just make sense of the world, because I was commuting into San Francisco, like 2.5 hours a day, dropping off my kids at 7 o'clock in the morning just to make it to work. And it was just like, go, go, go. And I'm like, this can't be all that there is to life. So when I read your book, it just felt like a breath of fresh air and a way that people should be living. So for you, what was the impetus to write this book?
Well, the impetus was my first pregnancy and going through the experience of being pregnant and giving birth and having a very difficult time with both, including the first year of motherhood, like that 20, what is it? Well, I don't know what the math is on that, but anyway, let's say it's like 21 months, nearly 2 years of really intense identity shift, and realizing it was the first time that I had encountered a challenge that I couldn't overcome by just trying harder, being smarter, or being stronger. Yeah. Like none of my strategies worked. And I really came to grips, or just started to get to know this other part around surrender and letting go. And, I was forced to do those things, and it continues to be a journey to learn how, but really realizing like the way that I had been programmed or, socialized to work was not how our bodies are designed, especially as women. And so I did a lot of research, and I knew I wasn't the only one who was having this experience. On the flip side, what was also interesting is that despite that difficult pregnancy where I really worked a lot less than I had before, that first year of parenthood with a sick baby, postpartum insomnia, postpartum anxiety, mastitis, not nearly enough childcare. I thought like 10 hours a week of childcare would be plenty to run my business at the same. I don't know what I was thinking, but anyway, so through all of that, what was really interesting is we sat down with our accountant and realized our business had made more money that first year that we were parents than any other previous year, while working significantly less. And so I just thought, well, I don't want to go through this year again. This was hell, but perhaps there's something I could learn from it that I could repeat again in less difficult years on purpose. And also, I'm not that special. So maybe there's something that everyone else might want to know about how to get better results through less time.
Yeah. Right. And I don't feel like enough moms even talk about that at all. Like we talk about the baby, but it's like, well, what about the mom and what it looks like to actually do all that? And I think so much of it too is like prior to kids, you have no idea what you're getting into and you just know how to run your life and you know what that looks like. And then throw a baby in the mix and it just throws everything out the window. And you realize that you really know nothing and that your old ways of doing things just don't apply at all. But that's just so cool that like you can make, or you did make more money that first year of doing less, because I think so many of us think that it's important to be productive and we have to be productive. Like our value is in the production and that's where we make our money, by just doing more and more and more. So that's such a great lesson. Did your husband say anything like about like what was his revelation? That was total side note, but
I mean, we were so in it. And because I struggled so much in early motherhood, he really picked up the baton from a business perspective, but also from a taking care of our daughter perspective. And he, we just did a lot of grappling with and renegotiating roles in our marriage and what the expectations that we both had were going into it versus what was actually going to work for our family unit. He was raised by a mom who is just absolutely this innately nurturing, like, she raised 3 kids and ran a daycare out of her house and like lets us drop our kids off at her house for the summer and like we can go do, she's just, I mean, not the whole summer, but like a week. And I love being a mom. I love my kids, but it wasn't like this instant, oh, this comes so naturally to me. I'm so happy in this role. I feel so at home here. Like I didn't have any of that experience. It was so much harder than I ever could have imagined. And it felt way less instinctual than I ever thought it would. And so I think for us, that early time was a lot about like, oh, like, okay, the baby doesn't always just come out and the woman like knows exactly what to do.
Right.
And it's like super mom.
Yeah. And throw in like sleep deprivation and mastitis, like you said, which is so painful. And
it's the worst.
Yeah. One of the gals on my team that I manage had a baby in December. And I feel like I'm reliving all of those moments vicariously through her because, she's trying to juggle it all in a different world too. I ended up quitting my job because I was like, oh no, I need to take care of this baby and I don't want to go back to that hustle and grind. So watching her juggle that, working remotely and having mastitis and all of it too, it's like, oh yeah, I don't need to do that again. And I'm glad that those days are over.
I know. It's so intense.
But as my listeners know, I do still work a 9-to-5 job and it is very deadline driven. And, there is that just push. I'm in the engineering world, so it's very male dominant too, which is very different, which I'm sure we can get into of like how women differ on our cycles versus the male dominant 24-hour cycle. But how can someone be a voice? Because a lot of my listeners are working moms, they're managers, they're leading teams, but how can they be a voice to kind of slow down and to maybe say like, there's a different way and maybe we can approach it differently?
Well, that's why I love chapter 2 in Do Less, because I really bring in the data that shows us that actually we do get better results when we have more space for the things outside of work that matter to us. So companies like 100% of the time actually increase productivity when they go to a 4-hour work week or create more flex time, or because there's less turnover. People are happier. When people are happier, they're more productive. They're more focused. When there's flexibility and workers feel like they have agency over their time and their workflow, they take more ownership of their work and they have better outcomes. So I really recommend coming from a data perspective. Do Less came out in 2019. So there's plenty of new data since then. And we went through the pandemic since then as well. And so there was a lot that we learned. But if you are reading, Harvard Business Review or Business Insider or a variety of publications, Cal Newport is a great writer on this particular topic. There's another one called Stolen Focus that I don't remember who wrote it, but there's like a pod of thinkers in this realm. And the truth is, managers, CEOs, the C-suite folks need to be thinking outside of the box in terms of how we work, if they want to stay relevant, if they want to keep good talent, and if they want to continue to have good results. Burnout levels are massively on the rise. They're higher in women. The pandemic made it worse. And yet, companies with more female leadership always do better in terms of their revenue and their productivity. And so we have an opportunity on our hands to shift the way we work so it's more in alignment with nature, more in alignment with how we are designed. And not only women, like women's bodies and men's bodies, all gendered bodies work fundamentally the same. There's just the menstrual cycle, which is a wonderful organizing structure for people who have menstrual cycles, but all of us are cyclical to some degree. All of us are cyclical, seasonal creatures that cannot be on all the time if we want to keep doing our best work. And so I recommend people, certainly grab a copy of Do Less, do their own reading and see and bring some data forward to make some suggestions, have an inquiry around like, maybe there's a committee that could guide some of these ideas. Maybe everyone could try just one tiny, like one tiny shift a season. It's not necessarily about creating massive change overnight, but little changes can make a really big difference.
Yeah, for sure. My team being marketing, it's all women. And I'm actually going to go on a retreat in a couple of weeks with them. And I'm going to talk about burnout and bring in some of the woo, which isn't woo, but people think it is in terms of our cycle and how we can really play up. And
hilarious that people think it's woo. I know. It's responsible for every human life.
Right.
Like there couldn't be anything more scientific.
Exactly. I know.
It's not talking to angels, which I believe in also, but
yeah, no,
it's not the same.
It's not. And I'm like, yeah, I really want to bring it up. And even with my daughters, my oldest is almost 12 and I've talked to her, I'm like, this is so cool because I didn't know this when I was a child. And you have this advantage of years on me of knowing how to move forward and like really tap into like your superpower. And here I'm like on the tail end of it. I'm like, thanks. Like, where was my mom?
I know. They didn't know, No. And I will say like my mom did know, but she couldn't practice it really because of her profession as a OBGYN at a time that there really weren't very many women doctors. And so she really, the only way to build her career was really to act like the best man in the hospital. And so even though she knew she couldn't practice it and I wasn't really interested in learning about it, so we all come to this stuff at our own timing and we have to just trust that we're going to pass it along the best we can.
No, for sure. But yeah, I love your ideas of like having even a committee and just bringing awareness around this conversation because I loved your analogy in the book of just, we can't be in that perpetual harvest, right? Like nothing in nature is in a perpetual harvest. And if we just take our cues from like spring, just a different season, it's like, notice there is a time to reap your rewards and to plant those seeds. And yeah. And there was one thing that you said to ask yourself, who are you when not in action? And that really hit me because I feel like, especially as a single mom, like my brain is constantly going, like I'm perpetually going, or I have this long to-do list that is insane, and that question just stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, oh yeah, like who am I? Because there's so much more to me and I have so much more value. Was there something, I mean, maybe that was like just something that you wrote and you didn't put any other thought into it, but was there something about that?
I mean, that's what really occurred to me during that first pregnancy when I was just so tired. I was just so tired and like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was just so intense. And then I thought about, well, who am I if I'm not capable? I mean, my identity, my whole life had been being capable. I mean, like I'm physically really strong. I'm like smart. I'm resourceful. So I just like felt like that's who I was. And then I had pregnancy brain. So I didn't feel that smart anymore. And I I wasn't that physically strong anymore, in that way, like, moving furniture and like,
Right. Yeah.
right. Like doing pull-ups. And then I wasn't particularly capable because I was so tired. And so then I thought, like, so if my value is 100% wrapped up in what I can do, what I can produce, what I can deliver, that's a real scary, that's like actually kind of upsetting because I don't know who I am without that.
Yeah.
And then I grappled with, who am I? What is my actual value as a human? Do we need to prove our value through doing things, or is it inherent? I believe it's inherent. So yeah, I think it's not an answerable question. I think it's a question to live into our entire lives. And it's one that helps me to be more present with my kids. It's one that helps me to do better work because it gives me space between my to-do list and all the things I am wanting to achieve, because I still am a very goal-oriented person, but like have the space to ask the bigger question, why? And what does this have to do with my greater purpose? What does this have to do? And am I doing it because I'm trying to prove something, or am I doing this because this activity and this is like an expression of my soul that I want to, leave here on the planet? So, and asking these bigger questions about our purpose, our value, who are we, they're existential, of course, but I think they can really help us in those moments of like, is this all there is? Like, I thought there was going to be more. And oftentimes when we're stuck in those places of, I thought there was going to be more, we're looking outside to see where the more could come from. And it's generally speaking an inside deep dive that's required, because the more comes from inside, and then the external can really look any number of ways. And in fact, doesn't even need to change at all. And you can suddenly feel like you have the greatest life in the world.
I love all of that. I mean, I think we so often give our power away, like even when we're sick, it's like we look to doctors when like, some basic things, just rest, drink some tea.
Totally. Totally. I know, it's so funny. Because I was raised by doctors, I don't ever go to the doctor. I've never been to the emergency room. Like, I don't go to urgent care. I don't, because, and my friends are always like, why didn't you like go get checked out? I'm like, because they're going to tell me to drink lots of fluids and like rest. So I'll just do that. It fixes most things.
Yeah.
Not to say that the medical profession isn't very helpful when we need them, as they are.
They are. Yeah. No. And I think you made a good point too, of like, when we get in the state of being productive, we just lose sight and numb ourselves with like the coping mechanisms become that distraction. And then we don't even ask ourselves these questions when, like you said, they're not going to be answered in a day, even maybe your lifetime, but it's like, we're almost too afraid to lean in. So then we keep ourselves more busy.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you said about numbing, because so many of us are caught in a loop of, well, the reason I have to keep so busy is because I have to get these results in order to survive. But actually, when we look at what's true, 80% of our results are caused by 20% of our actions.
Yeah.
That's Pareto's principle. It's just like across the board, it's true.
Yeah.
And so 80% of the time, we are actually doing things that are largely unnecessary to get any particular result we're after.
Yeah.
So we have to look at what's actually true, which is that the busyness is programming, and it is often a nervous system imprint that we are in a state of constant activity from a hypervigilant perspective, because we feel unsafe to stop, because there are most of the time feelings we don't want to feel and things we don't want to look at that would come up if we did stop to rest. So we are actually, the busyness is a great mechanism to avoid the thing that unconsciously we don't want to do, which is essentially be with ourselves, which means feeling some feelings that we may not want to feel because of all the stuff that happened to us before that we didn't have time or capacity or enough support to feel in that moment.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm 42, and like just this past week, I'm like, oh, like that's why I get triggered, because, XYZ happened when I was 5. I'm like, Why is this just hitting me now? Because I actually made space for it, you know?
Because you made space. And that's what's also so interesting. So people who have, like flashbacks to memories that come up that they didn't, they weren't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden they'll get, memories of abuse coming up in their 30s or their 40s. And that can obviously be incredibly horrifying and
Right.
really scary. And it's actually a sign of health, because when stuff comes up, it means we are at a place of enough stability that our psyche can bring that forward. Whereas if we're in survival mode or we're in a place where we just don't have capacity, that stuff won't arise because there's no space for it. And so even though that, it sounds like maybe your thing wasn't some huge dramatic thing, but there's a spectrum, right? And there's little T traumas, big T traumas, like all this stuff that we carry around. And when it starts to come up, it can feel like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? But actually, it's such a good sign that there's so much right.
Yeah, that's good. You just reminded me of this quote I heard. I have no idea who said it, where we like to stay stuck in a familiar hell versus pursuing unfamiliar heaven.
Yes.
Because even though the thing that we want is going to be healthy, there's what we perceive as obstacles getting there. And it's just like, oh yeah, like that makes so much sense. And we do that in that distraction of doing more.
I love that quote. And it's not even a conscious thing of like, oh, let me just stay with my humdrum life that like is painful on some level instead of going for my dreams. It actually is like deeply programmed in our nervous systems to stay. Our nervous systems develop essentially a thermostat setting for how much joy, abundance, well-being we can feel based on what was normal in our childhood. And according to the nervous system, which is, a whole network between our brain and our spinal cord and the nerves going through our body, it's the fundamental foundational system that impacts our endocrine system, our immune system, our digestive system. Like every system is essentially tied into how healthy is your nervous system. And the nervous system tracks everything unfamiliar as unsafe.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to making change, even towards things we really want, we have to actually work with our bodies to let them know that they're safe. Otherwise, we will keep sabotaging ourselves and stay in the same loop. So it'll be like, it's the same reason why you sit down to rest, but then you're just like scrolling, you're like doom scrolling your phone, because actually the body is trying to remain at the same stress set point because that's what it feels like for your body to feel alive.
Yeah.
So there's some, it's like very deep wiring.
Yes.
And I just say all this not to psychoanalyze everyone and make it all intense and not to say this is hard. It's just to say that it's not your fault.
Right.
Right. Like it's not your fault. There's plenty we can do about it. There's so many different beautiful somatic practices. There's, so much good stuff in my book, Do Less. Like we are living in a moment where nervous system awareness is becoming very much part of not every single conversation, but certainly like in my industry, no one was talking about the nervous system even 5 years ago. And now like probably 20 to 30% of people are. That's a huge increase. So it feels very hopeful for those of us who are healing over producers.
Yeah.
Or recovering hypervigilance.
Yeah. No, that awareness piece is so key. I mean, even last night, my oldest was, I don't know, just having a lot of anxiety about going to sleep. And I was like, dude, go to bed. Like when you're in that mom state, we're like, it is like 9:30. I just need you to close your eyes. Like, what is happening? And she was just getting more panicked. And I finally was like, okay, I'm going to hold you. Let's do some tapping. Let's, try to breathe. She was having trouble breathing, and kind of just, feeling your body senses. And I was like, I don't know, like, I know a little bit and I'm trying to help her, but I'm like, this just wasn't talked about when I was a kid. And
but how great that you could bring that to her, because what our culture, certainly the culture you and I grew up in, and still the mainstream, will sit with a 12-year-old girl or whatever and try to talk her out of her anxiety. Yeah. But anxiety doesn't live in the brain. It lives in the body. And we cannot talk our bodies out of what they're feeling. We can only feel our way through. So it sounds like you met her really beautifully in that moment.
Hopefully. Yeah. Like, what am I doing? I don't
Someday,
know.
when she's anxious and she's all alone, she will remember.
I know. Those are the things she says. She's like, what if you're not there? I'm like, well, this is why I'm giving you the tools, like I have to teach you. And thankfully you now have them and you can do this whenever and grow up doing this and not be 40 and freaking out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there other ways that we can honor our body, our energy? Like, what are some of your top 3 tools that you use?
I mean, not surprisingly to you, as someone who's read Do Less, if you are someone who has a menstrual cycle, I would absolutely recommend tracking it. Mm-hmm. So know when you're on day 1, which is the day you start bleeding. So it's pretty obvious. Start to get to know the signs of ovulation. I've been really leaning in heavy on using my Aura Ring and the Natural Cycles app and all the things, all the biomarkers, cervical fluid and the temperature and all the things. Get to know when you're in your luteal phase. So know the 4 phases of your cycle and how you are going to predictably feel during those times so that you stop the chatter of there's something wrong with you.
Right.
As a cycling person, you're going to have 4 different distinct energetic experiences of life over the course of a month. And it's totally normal and it's totally healthy. Mm-hmm. So if we can support and celebrate that, it does become our superpower as opposed to becoming something where you're like, I don't feel like myself. And I'm like, no, that's you. It's just a different part of you that hasn't been culturally celebrated historically, but it's time that we do celebrate the slower times, the more inward times. A woman who has her period has the least amount of energy as in the whole cycle, certainly on that day 1, the day before your period, day 1. For me, it's up until about day 2. It's I'm underground. But we're the most in touch with our intuition. So it's a powerful time. And historically, indigenous cultures and cultures thousands and thousands of years ago would honor the women who were bleeding because they had access to the deepest wisdom. That's still true about us. Just, we have a lot less time to orient ourselves around it and whatever. But even if you could take a 15-minute bath. So that is, that's one phase. And then you have a springtime phase, which is the week after you have your period. And you have a summertime phase, which is the week around the time you ovulate. And then you have an autumn, which is the 10 to 14 days before you bleed. And each of those seasons can be honored. So they can be honored in the way you exercise, with your schedule, the way you eat, how you, taking care of yourself, all kinds of things. So that's number 1. It's also really good for your productivity. So I'll just put that in there for people who do have a lot on their plates. Parents, we're busy. We got a lot going on. And what a beautiful way to pass on the wisdom to our daughters, if we do have them, to be witness to mothers who are taking good care of themselves. Because we can tell them all we want to tell them, but they're only going to do what they see us doing.
For sure.
Then the second thing is really learn a nervous system healing tool or 2 that really works for you. You mentioned tapping, the emotional freedom technique is a beautiful technique. My friends, the Ortners, have an app called the Tapping Solution that has a bunch of great tapping meditations on it. So that's an easy one that's free. It's pretty fast.
Yeah.
So get a nervous system healing tool. And some people will say oh, well, I meditate. And that might be a nervous system healing tool, but depending on how you're wired and your nervous system thermostat, meditation may not actually be the best first step. Some people are so hyper, when it comes to our nervous system, some of us are more hyper oriented and some of us are more hypo. So some move more towards fight, flight. Some move more towards freeze, fawn. Some of us do all of those things. Most of us do all of those things, but you'll know, am I more of a hyper? Am I when something goes on in my life, am I cleaning the grout with a Q-tip in the middle of the night? Or am I in my bed for 3 days under the covers? So you kind of know.
Yeah.
So for our hypers, meditation might be too big of a leap from our nervous system set point in order to find regulation. It might be too slow.
That's good. Yeah.
So just think about that. And then the third thing I would say, it's so simple, just really prioritize sleep. It makes everything better.
So true.
Like nothing works in life when we're sleep deprived.
No.
And luckily, you know, I think that Ariana Huffington did such a beautiful job with her pioneering work around sleep. I mean, there's just so much more and more. Like, think the conversation is really changing around
For
sleep.
sure.
Thank goodness. But just like sleep, go to bed early, turn off your phone 2 hours before bed, stop eating 3 hours before bed.
Yeah.
Like, just do it.
Yeah, I know. Even though I know that, that's definitely something that I'm still working on. Like I've listened to all the like Matt Walker, Huberman Lab, I'm like, I know it's sleep. As long as
It's
I'm
sleep.
good. Yeah.
It is literally like that's the one thing, right? That Gary
Yeah.
Keller book, the one thing. Sleep is the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary.
Right. That's also what I tell my kids. I'm like, it's important. Just go to bed.
It's it.
Yeah. So many good nuggets. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm definitely like that. I clean.
Yeah.
And like I'm angry. I'm like, I gotta clean everything.
Yeah. Totally. I know. I do like an aggressive counter wipe. Mike's like, are you okay? I'm like, yes, everything's fine. This counter's just really dirty.
Right. Which also reminds me of like my luteal phase where I'm like productive 1 to 2 days where I'm like, I know I'm supposed to be like wrapping things up. And then I'm just like crash and burn, I'm like, why am I crying? I'm like, oh yeah. Like even I forget, like I know some of these tools and it's like, what is wrong with me? And I'm like, oh, okay. What day is it in the month?
What day is it? Your body's doing exactly what it's designed to do. And that negativity filter during our luteal phase is really useful because it's a great compass for what might need some attention in our lives. So notice what makes you really emotional. If it makes you really emotional in terms of like, you're just like touched and you have an open heart, beautiful, like steer your life more towards that stuff because it's what matters to you. If it's stuff that makes you really irritated or angry, great, write it down. Take it into the menstrual phase and see if you can get an intuitive hit if there's something you need to tweak in that area of your life. And then if we pay that attention every single month in our cycling years, perimenopause isn't quite so intense.
Mm-hmm. No, that's the truth for sure. And I think you quoted someone, which maybe I don't know who you quoted, but what you appreciate appreciates.
Oh yeah, I think that's Abraham Hicks.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But just that of like that awareness, every month, it's like, if we actually take the time, the few minutes, it doesn't need to be hours, just like, self-care doesn't need to be hours. We can really like change our lives. Mm-hmm. Or so I think. That's what I want to think.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And I mean, you said it throughout the book too. It's like when we start to do less, like we get so much more life because we're just tuning into these natural cycles. And I think people are hesitant to that.
Yeah.
And it's okay to let go of things, to let the balls fall.
100%. Yeah, no one's going to get to their deathbed and be like, oh man, wish I had gotten more done.
Right.
No one says that.
No, not at all. Oh my gosh. So true. There was one other thing maybe about receiving help because I'm crazy independent, especially as a single mom. I've had to juggle so much just on my own. But you say something is that sometimes we learn to not expect help. And so we don't even ask. And that goes back kind of to like the worthy piece. And I think if there's just like one last thing that you want to end on of like, how can we kind of tune into letting ourselves receive that help and knowing like we are worthy to receive help because we're all in this together, like at the end of the day, we're all just humans having this experience and we're all struggling whether we say it or not. And it's just time to do less and receive that help from one another.
Yeah. Well, I think that something that it's taken me a long time to understand as a fiercely independent woman as well, who's always identified as really capable and like having it together, is that when we don't ask for help or always act as though we're okay, we actually keep ourselves disconnected from others. So we keep ourselves walled off from love that's available and connection and support that's available. And so we lose out on intimacy and like the real meaning of life, which is connection. And the other thing that's interesting is that the same part in our brain lights up when we are giving as when we are receiving. And so I don't think that's by accident. There's got to be something to that. It's sort of that piece where, basically like all spiritual religions, when you trace them back to the original texts before the kings and the emperors and whatever rewrote them, it goes back to like, we are all one. We are all individual expressions of the divine spark. Yeah. And you call it the universe, call it God, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really interesting that our brains light up in the same place, that's activated when we are giving as when we're receiving. Because to me, what that says is that's that place where we are, as you said, all in this together, and there is no difference. And what we're really here to do is connect with each other, not prove how much we can get done without help. Like, what is that? That's just so lonely.
It is.
It's just so freaking lonely.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the greater context. But I also encourage people who have trouble asking for help to think about the last time somebody they really respected asked them for help. And I know for me, I'm always so honored. Mm-hmm. When someone asks me for help who I think is really capable and smart and awesome, I'm always thrilled. And so that's the truth for most people, is that we're thrilled to support each other, because human connection, like at the end of the day, it's the only thing that's real. It's like our connection with ourselves, our connection with each other, our connection with the earth, our connection with God, spirit, whatever. Like that's what we're here to do. And so asking for, and certainly giving as well, help. It breaks down the pretend walls of capability and like brings us into vulnerability and intimacy. And it's beautiful. Life feels better that way.
Yeah. I love that.
At first it's uncomfortable, then it feels better.
Well, yeah, of course.
Like so many things.
Right? Everything we're doing feels uncomfortable at first, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many articles too of like this epidemic of loneliness. And it's like, because we just have become so isolated, and we don't need to be.
It's not how we were designed. We are herd creatures.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. Where can my audience find you?
Yeah. So the best place to connect is on Instagram at Kate Northrup, and then also on my website, katenorthrup.com. I have a guidebook that I created that's free. It's called the Business Pressure Relief Kit, but it really could be called the Life Pressure Relief Kit. So you don't have to run your own business for it to be applicable to you. You can go ahead and download it and just work through. There's 6 really practical strategies to feel like more spacious and find some relief and find that exhale right away, even in super high pressured life situations.
I highly recommend those tools. I've used them. So thank you for creating them. You also have some killer dance moves on Instagram. So definitely go check those out. Makes me smile. So
I'm glad.
Yeah. Do you CrossFit too? Or what do you do?
I don't do CrossFit. I started like in February. I started just going to the gym a few times a week and lifting weights for like 30 minutes. Like no big deal. Just keeping up the bone density.
It's true. I know. My ex-husband was in the CrossFit world. So I'm always like,
oh yeah, totally.
It looks like a kind of like a CrossFit body, but really it just means you're lifting heavy weights.
Like I do CrossFit fit. I do not. I just think it's a genetic type for some reason.
That works too. But yes, lift those weights. I'm a big advocate of those too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Kate, for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Isn't she pretty great? If you loved Kate, check out her free The Business Pressure Relief Kit at katenorthrup.com, or grab your own copy of Do Less. Links to both of those are in the show notes. And if you love PG-ish, please share this episode with a friend so that more parents can grow alongside their kiddos like you. See you next time.